The U.S. and the EU appear to be showing a united front over concerns about their country's reliance on China's manufacturing concerns, fueled by China's ties to Russia amid the war in Ukraine. So according to CNBC, fewer items are being sent to the U.S. from Beijing. Demand for Chinese manufacturing reportedly dropped 40%, and container volume is said to be down 21% since August. So joining me now is Keith Bradsher. He's the Beijing bureau chief for the New York Times. Keith, thanks for joining us. This is actually a much more interesting conversation than it appears on the surface. Because I remember in the middle of the pandemic, there was all this talk about how container prices are through the roof, and there were all these elements contributing to why items were getting more and more expensive. And recently I bought like a little item coming from China for my kid, and it took the weirdest route, stopping in Ireland and all these other places. And I wondered why. And now I get a little more insight. Demand is down. There has to be creativity to make money. So give us an overview, if you could, as to how we got here. Why has demand for Chinese goods plummeted?
American families and households bought incredible quantities of Chinese goods over the last 3 years of the pandemic because many of them were stuck at home. Now, as you've seen a rapid reopening in the United States, people spending their money instead on travel, on restaurant meals, and many of them concluded they don't need any more stuff for their homes. The companies like Walmart and Target had ordered so many goods that now the warehouses all over the United States are full to bursting. The cost of storing goods, even in a warehouse in the United States, has gone way up because more goods are arriving. They don't know where to put them all. They've been reluctant to have really drastic sales at American stores. And so that is backing up all the way through the supply chain. Now we're getting the opposite. We're getting it backing up through the supply chain to the factories, which have seen order cutbacks here. We're seeing it, the disappearance of those supply chain problems. Now the dock workers don't even necessarily have enough to do in the United States. So it's really been a sharp transition. The New York Times was reporting on this a couple of months ago, that you can see now these steep declines in container traffic, and that has created a challenge for China because it comes at a time when the domestic economy also is not looking so strong.
Right. And we know we've talked about the shutdowns and manufacturing shutdowns because of their zero COVID policy. We'll get to that in a second. But my question now is, if it's bad news for China, is it good news for something else, for someone else or another country? Is it good news for American consumers? Is it good news for Europe?
Well, it's good news for American airlines. The airlines in the United States have a lot more business now. That's where people are spending their money. It's good news, for example, for cruise lines, which had practically shut down during the pandemic. It's good news for hotels and restaurants in the United States. All these services businesses are getting the spending instead. So it's not as though you're seeing a little bit of a shift in spending away from Chinese goods and towards goods from Vietnam. There's been a small shift in production towards Southeast Asia. But mostly what you're seeing is a weakening in the demand for manufactured goods overall.
And so now fold in the zero COVID policy, factories shutting down for extended period of times. And we have Apple saying that it is seriously considering moving its production outside of China. And I hear that Tim Cook's been kind of snooping around India, looking to see if that might be a viable option. My question to you is, how does that sort of add to this story? And, you know, Apple's a big company. Could this be sort of the beginning of a new trend where manufacturers are not considering China the best place to go to manufacture their cheap goods?
Manufacturers have been looking for alternatives to China for the past decade because they're concerned about being overly reliant on it. You look at Apple, for example, and they tried to set up a string of factories in India 7 years ago. It has moved very slowly. There are a lot of land issues there. There have been some labor issues, and they've had trouble getting it going. On top of that, they have very, very extensive suppliers and suppliers to those suppliers and suppliers to the suppliers to the suppliers, and those are all in China. And so moving that whole supply chain out of China is very difficult. So they are looking again even harder now at ways to do so. So that is really a medium-term challenge, though. The immediate challenge is the is the coincidence of having a slowdown of demand in the United States at the same time that COVID has prompted people to be very wary of going to stores, if the stores are even open right now because of the various COVID measures. And so you've got a slowdown in people buying goods within China, and you've got a slowdown in people buying Chinese goods outside of China.
Keith, Bradsher, thank you very much. It's a very interesting conversation. You managed to simplify it for us. Thank you.
Thank you.